talks are all about ideas. And one of the biggest ideas ever is world peace. Everybody, from preachers to political leaders to beauty pageant winners, seems to be in favor of it. But nobody knows how to create it. Well, I have made a discovery. There is a common factor behind all, not all, but many of the behaviors and beliefs that divide us so deeply into us and them. I believe this insight is something that could help us resolve prejudice, racism, sexism, religious extremism, nationalist extremism, which might even lead to world peace. What is that wonderful insight? At the heart of all those isms, the problem is adjectives. Really. Specifically, adjectives being improperly used as nouns. Okay, I'm an English major. I can't help it. Now, you all know what a noun is, a person, place, or thing. And an adjective is very simply a word that describes a noun. I'm wearing a pink jacket. If you were going to refer to it, you wouldn't stop at the adjective and call it a pink. You would finish the sentence with the noun, jacket. But all too often when we refer to other people, stopping at the adjective is exactly what we do. We fail to finish the sentence with the noun, the person. An example, the word creative. It is a perfectly respectable, responsible adjective, but increasingly I'm seeing it misused as a noun, as in describing people who create interesting or beautiful things, not creative people or people doing creative things, but creatives. Now, I think actually this usage is intended to be inclusive, to come up with a term that is broader than artist, but ironically, it has the opposite effect, because using creative as a noun arbitrarily divides people into us and them by making that a label that only applies to certain people. Now, I'm a writer. I guess I qualify. I get to be a creative. If you make photographs or quilts or paintings or music, okay, you're creatives too. Come on over here. We're us. But what about you scientists or engineers or plumbers or accountants? Too bad. So sorry. You're not creatives. You're over there. You're them. Now, this usage completely disregards all of the creative problem solving that these people do. And what it does is create an arbitrary and artificial us and them. Now, I'm wondering if it isn't just as artificial and arbitrary to use so many of the adjectives we use as nouns to divide ourselves into us and them. Words like white, black, native, Christian, Muslim, rich, poor, liberal, conservative, victim, redneck, elderly, handicapped, homeless. We use so many of these words as nouns that even the dictionary calls a lot of them nouns. But really, if you take a closer look, they're adjectives. They describe the noun, person. Now, when we misuse these adjectives as nouns, I'm sure most of the time there's no malicious intent whatsoever. It's just a handy verbal shortcut. But what it does, just as with the word creative, it steals an adjective a descriptor and turns it into a label that can only apply to certain people. And there's several problems with using labels for people. One of them is, what are labels very commonly attached to? Baggage. We all have prejudices and assumptions and expectations and misconceptions about other groups from our own experience. We bring that baggage in every time we use an adjective as a noun. And it's that baggage that leads us not just to describe people with adjectives, but to label them with the ugly adjectives, the hateful ones, the nasty ones, that are meant to increase that distance between us and them. The second problem with labels, they stick. And what happens when you stick on a label? You hide whatever is behind it. So if I categorize you with a label, like redneck or liberal or homeless, I make that one aspect of you the only thing I see or the only thing that matters to me. I see you one-dimensionally. And I ignore or miss all of the rest of the complex things that make you the individual human being you are. And the other problem with labels is that they limit the way we see ourselves as well as the way we see other people. They give us only one or two ways to define our tribes. Now, we as humans evolved to belong to small groups, family groups, and then larger tribal groups and communities. It's even possible that early on, our survival depended on that us and them thinking, on our ability to defend our people and our resources against outsiders. But I suspect in today's world, it's possible our survival might depend on broadening the way we define our tribes, of expanding who we see as us instead of them. I would like you to imagine with me that this room is growing and growing and growing. And it's expanding into the most enormous stadium you have ever seen, filled with thousands of people from all over the world. People of all races, all nationalities, religions, all ages, an incredible diversity. If you walked into that gathering, where might you fit? Who might be like you? How would you find your tribe? Well, if we started with the obvious, which we so often do because it's comfortable, I, for example, might see my tribe as white people, or women, or Americans, or older people. And all of those are perfectly legitimate adjectives that describe aspects of who I am. But if I grab one of those and stop there, I overlook all the other potential tribes in this diverse, huge group that I might belong to. Here are just a few of them. People who write, people who have children, people who have grandchildren, people who have been widowed or divorced, people in 12-step recovery programs, people who love to read, people who can't recognize their own faces in the mirror without their lenses. In this vast and diverse gathering of people, there are literally dozens and dozens of tribes that I could belong to, that each of us could belong to. And once we start finding those commonalities and connections, it's entirely possible that every person in that group could become us instead of them. Of course, there's just one catch. In order to make those connections, we have to be willing to discover people instead of labeling them with adjectives. We have to have conversations. And it's kind of difficult to have a conversation with an adjective. Now, by now, you may have decided that I was badly injured by an adjective at some point, and I have something against them. Not true. I like adjectives. I use them. They're useful. Sometimes they're very important. For example, suppose I have just robbed a convenience store, and I am running off down the street as fast as I can go with a six-pack of beer in each hand. When the clerk calls the police, I would strongly recommend using adjectives to describe my race and my gender and my height and even my weight and everything else about me. That's what adjectives are for. They're descriptors. So I'm certainly not suggesting that we stop using them. I just suggest that we use them more carefully, more consciously, to remember that they don't define people. They describe aspects of who we are. And I don't mean that we should ignore those aspects either. All of the things about us, like our race, our religion, where and how we grow up, our abilities, our experiences, those certainly shape who we are and how we are in the world. And it would be ridiculous to pretend none of those matter. But isn't it just as ridiculous to grab one or two of those characteristics and pretend that they're the only thing that makes us who we are? Organizations that support people with special needs ask us to use phrases like people with disabilities instead of saying the disabled, to always see the person first. And all I'm suggesting is that we extend that same courtesy and that same respect to everybody. Now, if we do that, is that really going to bring about world peace? Of course, I was exaggerating completely, but maybe not. Because that's a small change, a small verbal shift, something that's easy enough. Any of us can do it. But what happens when we make that verbal shift, we don't just change our language, we change our thinking. And that has the potential to make a big difference. So why don't we try it? To choose not to stop at that easy adjective, but to finish the sentence, to get to the person. And to keep in mind that the most important part of speech is that essential human noun. Thank you.